All right. Good afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. Uh, we're going to get started right here. My name is Jeff Tucker with Tucker Company Worldwide, and we're pleased today to have Lee Klaskow, Senior Analyst and Category Lead for Bloomberg Intelligence, with us. Had the pleasure of having dinner with Lee 2 nights ago at the Trans-Pacific Maritime Conference in Long Beach, California. A lot of things happening in freight transportation. I'm going to share the screen just a moment here, but I'm going to suggest that you utilize the question and answer for questions at the end. As a reminder, this is a 15-minute discussion, which will end probably at 12:15 Eastern. And we will go right into as maximum 15 minutes of Q&A for Lee. So allow me to share my screen and get things going. All right, sorry folks. This is a terribly ugly transition. Well, I'll tell you what, I don't think we have any slides. So what we're going to do is I'm going to unshare. I'm going to unshare my screen and we're just going to get right into it. Lee, why don't we why don't we get right into that? First of all, Lee, if you would just tell us if folks want to follow you, follow your commentary, and I encourage folks to follow Lee because I've found Lee to be among the most informed and most reliable in terms of the analysts out there that follow transportation. Lee follows the broad range of transportation modes, and in the last 2, 3, 4 years, I've learned to trust Lee's perspective as much as I trust, and if not more, than anyone else's perspective following the industry. So Lee, how would we follow you?
Well, thanks for those kind words, Jeff, and thanks for having me here today. I'm on Twitter. I'm kind of new to Twitter, so you can follow me at @logisticslee. I'm also on LinkedIn. My last name's Klaskow. You can find me there. Always happy to talk to shippers, transportation folks. Makes my research deeper and more interesting. So I welcome all questions and conversations via social media. So that's where you can reach me.
Great. Thank you. And I encourage you to again, to follow Lee. But Lee, so we can get right into it. We're still in something of a global mess from a transportation and logistics and supply chain perspective today. But in some areas there may be a sense that well, let's say before Putin invaded his neighbor, things you could maybe see the end and an equilibrium coming. Where do you see things in let's say truck and intermodal and ocean and drayage?
Right, and that's an interesting way to tee up the conversation because you mentioned that people thought that things were going to reach more of an equilibrium before Putin invaded or Russia invaded Ukraine. But the reality is that we've had one after another, what we would call a black swan event, something that's kind of hard to predict, impacting supply chains. And it hasn't just, usually it's one thing, there's a shock, people react, they recover, you get back to normal. We haven't gotten back to normal in over 2 years since the pandemic. I don't believe we are going to get back to normal this year. Depending on the modes we're talking about, I don't think we're going to get back to normal next year. When you're looking at the trucking market, there's a lot of things from a secular standpoint that are impacting capacity. And from our standpoint, it's really about supply. So barring a deep recession, which we don't believe we are headed into, expectations are for GDP to grow around 3.5 to I think 3.7% this year. So, we have economic growth as a backdrop. There's a lot of things that have impacted trucking supply that have pushed spot rates up 30% last year, 15% this year, and are pushing contract rates up 10 to 15% this year, depending on, maybe who you are, what you carry, and what you use. And we expect rates to continue to increase at that level. And some of those issues are, everyone kind of knows about driver demographics. Older drivers are leaving, younger drivers aren't coming in. But you also had the clearinghouse that the DOT put into effect last year. That took out a lot of folks out of the market because if you had an alcohol or drug issue, there are ways to get back into the market as a driver. And a lot of drivers that have little checks or dings next to their name because of testing positive for marijuana are not coming back. They're not doing anything to get their licenses reinstated. And because you have a product like marijuana, which is legal in some states, but federally it's illegal. So if that's your cup of tea, shall we say, you're not going to want to be a driver, and you're going to search employment elsewhere. So there's that aspect of it. There's also the work-life balance, which has always been an issue. I think the ATA, I can't remember the exact number, but it's something like 60 to 80,000 drivers that they believe we're currently short right now, and it's very hard to fill those jobs. There's very high turnover at trucking companies. If you're a driver, you think trucking might be the career for you, you get into it, you realize that, wow, it's a lot tougher than I thought it was, and you just leave the market and go do something else. And also right now, drivers have a lot of options in what they can do. They can work in a warehouse and make similar money, maybe not as much, but similar money. But then they have better work-life balance. They're at home. They're seeing their family, and for some people that's good. Other people that's not so good. So they decide to be truckers, and they're on the road 3 to 4 or 3 weeks out of the month. So we think the supply will be constrained, and that's having a ripple effect across all modes. LTL, less than truckload, for example. Old Dominion this morning came out with some statistics for February. Rates were up around 11% for them, excluding fuel surcharges. So you're seeing high rates, not in the truckload market, but it's going in the LTL market. And if you're seeing high truckload rates and LTL rates, guess what? Intermodal rates are up too by double digits. So there's really a flow through effect. And even as rails probably are not providing the best service as they can and should be, they're still able to raise rates. And that's pretty impressive. And it speaks volumes in terms of how tight the actual market is. I think you're on mute, Jeff.
Thank you. JV mistake we all of us make every day, right? A 3PL CEO just came out, I think yesterday, or was quoted yesterday as saying, he sees contract rates stabilizing this year and maybe only up single digits. That seems in contrast to what what you've just indicated, maybe, and what a number of other folks have said. I mean, but is this period of time, and it's really hard to predict the future, as many of us have failed and tried and failed many times before. But what signs do you look for, let's say, in either in the data or experience, or what signs do you look for where you start to think, well, the worm's turning a little bit and maybe we're reaching an equilibrium?
Right. So, we look at, a lot of different data points on Bloomberg, and we're pretty fortunate enough to have a lot of transportation related data. And one of the things that we look at is truckstop.com's market demand index. And, that index is up pretty substantial this year. It's up, a lot last year, and it remains extremely high. And we'd have to see that number to come down. It's up around 35% this year, and up around 131% last year. We'd have to see that number coming back to maybe not necessarily 2019 numbers, but we need to see it make a meaningful move to the downside. And we're just not seeing that because obviously, as the spot market becomes more in equilibrium, then the pricing power at trucking companies wanes a little bit. I would argue about, the comment you made earlier about like single digit increases in contractual rates. The reality is that, rates aren't just higher because of supply and demand dynamics, meaning that, the truckers, have, a limited amount of capacity and shippers have more demand in that capacity. They're also facing a lot of inflationary pressures that they need to pass on because they have to, earn a certain return on their investments to warrant buying new trucks, expanding facilities. So, trucking prices have gone up, fuel prices have gone up, and labor prices have gone up. And one of the other things that we would look for really is really the labor pool, labor availability. And I think because that's really been one of the things that have been pushing not only labor costs higher for trucking companies and other transportation companies, but it's also providing a lot of opportunities that people might have been, maybe they might have become a trucker, but now, like we were mentioning earlier, they'd rather swing a hammer closer to home, and be home more often. It's not just the trucking companies that are finding hard to get people on board. It's also, the railroads. Some of the railroads in the U.S. are having issues. They've probably furloughed a little too much when volumes came crashing down, and some of those employees aren't coming back. And then younger people, might, while working on a rail is an extremely good job, it's a union job, but it's not a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, working in an air conditioned or heated office. You're working out in the elements, and when you're first starting, you're probably working not the best hours. You might be working overnight, you might be working weekends, and what we're finding is that younger generations really value their work-life balance. And when you have a network that's 24/7, there becomes an issue in terms of trying to attract talent.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was at a show called Food Shippers of America, sat next to a very, very large shipper. Then they moved some specialty items, so they've got some specialty drivers, and the rates have gone up so high in some of their lanes that some of the younger drivers that drive for those type of carriers that I don't want to be too specific to protect the innocent, but some of these are highly specialized drivers. And what this individual was saying is that a lot of those drivers, they're making so much money now that they're taking more days off than they've ever seen, in the past. Now, some of the more seasoned, or his words, seasoned drivers, those folks have been around a while, they're just working every day but that's a indicator, right, of this extra money. And we talked about this with our panel discussion a couple of days ago, talked about this too, is that people have a lot more money now, that like drivers do, and yeah, maybe they can afford to take a little bit more personal time, because being on the road 7 days a week is a bear.
Yeah, I mean, it is, it's tough because, for those that've never driven a truck before, I mean, I haven't driven an over-the-road truck, but I've driven a truck in a lot before, so I know the hardships of a truck driver. I say that kiddingly. No, but in all seriousness, I mean, it is tough because, not all, some shippers don't treat truckers very well. You always hear examples of where, like, there's signs like, you can't use the restroom, or they make a trucker wait a long time, and truck drivers, they get paid by the mile, they don't get paid by the hour. So the longer they're waiting to work, they're not making any money. And so I know you were on a panel at TPM, and you guys were talking about being a shipper of choice. I think that's extremely important for shippers out there that are looking to manage not only their costs, but the relationships with truckers. Because if you provide a better place for truckers to come, you will have a better chance of finding capacity, because there are a number of load boards out there, whether it's JB Hunt 360 or just various other kind of boards out there, and people rate and rank shipping facilities. And if enough people say don't go there, you're going to find it really hard to find capacity. and maybe the capacity you have is maybe not the best capacity, i.e. they might not be have the safest records, or have high cargo claims.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think that what we're seeing is larger carriers, more sophisticated carriers, and 3PLs are scoring based on an ROI, right? This location, this customer, drains us. That in fact, one of the panels a couple of weeks ago of Food Shippers, where drivers were talking about, it's insulting, to have to wait 3 or 4 hours. It's taking money out of my pocket, so they get upset. So what we're hearing is carrier management saying we're not taking volume to hit numbers any longer. We're taking on new volume if it works for us and our drivers. And the drivers are a very significant component of that decision-making process, because as you started out this conversation, you just can't afford to continue to go through these drivers and continue to hire. We're just a couple minutes past that 12:15 Eastern, and I'm going to let folks know that the presentation portion is moving into Q&A, and we will finish Q&A exactly at 12:30 Eastern. So I'm going to want to get into Q&A. Folks, ask you to use either the chat or the Q&A. As we wait, one of the things, Lee, I wanted to ask you if you see this, because we heard it loud and clear from numerous large carriers in a couple of meetings recently. When talking about new volume, most of the largest carriers are maxed out, right? When they're talking about taking on additional volume, they don't have a bunch of empty trucks. They don't have a bunch of drivers not doing anything. They have to take that capacity from business they're currently handling and apply it to what you or I or someone else might be suggesting. What we were hearing were things like, we're only going to do that if it makes sense for us, and again, back to that driver. But B, we're earning a great return right now, so we'd have to make at least 10% more on the pricing to take capacity away from one and give it to another. From the coverage that you see, of course, without naming names, are you seeing and hearing that internally from operations?
Well, I think all transportation companies during this cycle have, they call it yield management. So it's a nice way of saying pretty much what you just said, where they're looking at their book of business and making sure it reaches a certain return on investment threshold. A lot of trucking companies, some of them are using the dedicated business to grow their fleets. So it's not just, they need a real commitment, meaning that, a shipper needs 5 trucks a week during this lane, and then they're able to truly price it out, and that's more or less, a guaranteed load. You're seeing like shippers, or I'm sorry, trucking companies very much willing to invest in those sort of lanes. And then kind of for their irregular routes or over the road networks, they're really tapping the owner operator market more, because, most trucking companies in general are asset intensive businesses. And a lot of the large publicly traded trucking companies over the last 10 years have tried to evolve to reduce that asset base. So, whether it's, Knight Swift going into the brokerage business or intermodal business, whether it's, JB Hunt, expanding more and more into its broker business, or intermodal business, you're seeing them, kind of shy away from making those heavy investments, because at the end of the day, even though we're in this, I don't know if it's necessarily a super cycle, but an elongated rate cycle, there is going to be, what goes up must come down. And so they want to protect themselves from the downside, and just for argument's sake, our kind of call, and we've been extremely bullish on the truckload cycle. It's something, we've gotten right, and we don't get everything right, that is for sure. We think we're going to have double-digit rate increases this year, and we think we're going to have low single-digit rate increases next year. There's just a lot of things, from our foggy, cracked crystal ball that we look at, kind of pointing towards a really strong market over the next, call it 2 years. We would kind of push back on, the comment that you mentioned earlier from a broker, I forgot who you said it was, someone thinking that, rates are going to increase by single digits this year. We just think that is, that's not really taking the true picture of what's going on, especially on the supply side. And, as I guess I'm transitioning to your initial question, is yield management side too. So, unless you're willing to play to pay, you're not going to get capacity, or you're not going to get, at least a somewhat guaranteed capacity.
Thanks. We had a question. What are your thoughts about changing the way drivers are paid per mile versus maybe going to hourly or a day? Or are you seeing that change anywhere in a meaningful way?
I mean, I'm not seeing it in a meaningful way. I think trucking companies try to get creative as a part of retaining drivers, but that's not really a push, because at the end of the day, it kind of like getting paid by the mile, and if everything's working well, it does work well for the truck driver, especially in a high rate environment. So we don't see that. Obviously, there are certain businesses like drayage that's more they're paid per the load, a lot of times. But on the over the road trucking, it's pretty much pay per mile, which has been kind of the bedrock of the industry. We don't see that really changing anytime soon.
Okay. One last question, unless there are others, folks, and again, use the Q&A or the chat. But you mentioned you saw like a 3 point, what was the number for GDP growth this year? 3.8-ish?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exact number. Hang on.
Why are you doing that?
I'm on the Bloomberg terminal. Yeah, 3.7% growth this year, 2.5% next year, and 2.1% in 2024. That's consensus estimates. That's not Bloomberg intelligence estimates. That's the average of all like Wall Street analysts and economists out there.
Yeah, so that to me, going through what we had, that 10-year economic recovery, longest economic recovery in the nation's history, ended in 2018, 2019, and then it came back again after COVID, and we're living through it now. But prior to those, during those 10 years, anytime we had something over that 2.5, that three higher, that in and of itself created a strain on capacity. So that would, if that consensus holds this year, that in and of itself, I think, on top of what we've been through, that in and of itself dictates that we're going to have, a challenging rest of the year. At least my 2 cents and my experience over the 30 that I've been in this.
And not to bore people with economics, facts, and figures, but CPI, which is a measurement of inflation, that's expected to increase about 5.1%, this year. So, barring anything else, you could assume that a rate would increase 5.1%. But then you throw upon that all of the issues specific to the trucking market. That's where we're getting that double-digit increase that we think. We're not talking about 20%. I would have to say, when I say low double digits, I'm thinking 11 to 13%. But that's still pretty good pricing. And again, it is you have to have those higher rates to mitigate the inflationary pressures that the trucking companies are facing.
We have another question, Lee. It's do you see a higher number of shippers going back to dedicated fleets? Just if I could, or if you would just really encapsulate dedicated fleet in the event that there's folks on that don't know what that is first.
Yeah, so a dedicated fleet would be like if you see like a Walmart, trailer. It's actually being hauled by, call it JB Hunt, and they contracted with JB Hunt to go call it a DC and maybe a couple stores of a couple loads a week, or and that's how they price it. They price it versus pretty much cost plus. So it's the shipper has guaranteed capacity. It usually comes at a better price, and it actually usually has higher service levels because those drivers are usually on those routes, and they know the ins and outs of those routes, with whether it's going into different yards or traffic patterns or what have you. So, they're kind of experts in those routes. Some big players in that are JB Hunt, Werner. They're pretty big players in the dedicated business. We've been long kind of bullish companies relative to others that do have dedicated, because we do not see, while capacity might loosen from here, having good capacity is always a great thing if you're a shipper. And if you can lock that down and not have to worry about it, and you can have high service levels at the same time, I think that more and more shippers are doing it. And this dedicated is also, it used to be like also some final mile business as well, but a lot of companies have kind of spun out that part of the business of dedicated, and now it tends to be purely just truckload lanes. So so I guess the question is, if I was a shipper, and obviously I'm not, but I would very much see if dedicated fits into my portfolio of what I spend my transportation dollars on, for all the things that we talked about. And you're also really building a strategic relationship with the capacity provider, and that might help you in times of like today when you're kind of looking for loads. Your ROI to do business might be lower than a competitor's ROI, and also the trucking company, while ROI is extremely important, they are also interested in building strategic relationships with their shippers, and so the more you can do to do that, the better you are throughout the cycle.
Yeah, and as an operator of a logistics company, I can tell you, or the audience, that we're seeing a lot more, having a lot more conversations around dedicated for those exact reasons, right? You just need the reliability. You need it to set it, our internal phrase, set it and forget it. It's not quite that easy, but that's what you need. And you're looking for those turns, your predictability, and make my problems go away. And I think dedicated, a lot of trucking companies went very heavily to dedicated when it first kind of caught excitement years ago, and then really had very little of their capacity out into the spot. I think those things, they ebb and flow a little bit, but I think to your point, carriers love the predictability as well, right? Mm-hmm. It's drivers a little happier oftentimes. They know the deal, they know and they're home maybe a little bit more frequently. So when you can get that working, it's excellent.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Jeff. They're regular routes, so they have some regularity to their life, and so that improves the work-life balance of the drivers.
Okay, Lee, we have no further questions. I want to thank you for being here with us today. I'm gonna do this one more time. I'm gonna try to share my screen again. Let's see if this works, folks. All right. Do we see my?
We do.
All right. Okay. Well, we're past this, right? There's Lee. Thank you, Lee. We do have our next date coming up is scheduled for April 21st. Larry Gross, who I've known for many, many years, an economist that studies intermodal. So it's going to be very intermodal specific. And going to talk a little bit about what's happening in that world. And let's see there. See one more Q&A. Gosh, do we have time? Many large carriers are adding additional services. Truckload carriers adding LTL and final miles. Do you want to sum that up, Lee, in a minute?
I think they're just looking to be more diversified, to diversify away from truckload at a time where they're making pretty good money and they have cash to make investments.
Outstanding. Agreed. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Lee, thank you.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Take care.